You're listening to How to Reach the West Again, a podcast that aims to inspire and empower a fresh missionary encounter with Western culture. I'm your host, Brandon O'Brien. In this season, we've narrowed our focus to cities. What are they? What does the Bible say about them? How do we plant churches there? What does it mean to love them? What unique challenges and opportunities does city ministry present? In this episode, we hear a brief explanation from Tim Keller about why it takes a citywide, collaborative, trans-denominational church planting and renewal network to reach a city. After that, we hear testimonials from 3 practitioners who participate in just such a citywide collaborative network in Frankfurt, Germany. That conversation is hosted and recorded by our friends at the Center for Church Planting in Frankfurt. But first, Tim Keller.
I don't believe a city can be reached strictly by one church or even a big church or even a church planting network. I would like to talk to you just for 1 minute or two on what a city reaching movement really is. To me, a city reaching movement is when the body of Christ is growing faster than the population of the whole of the city. So when the number of Christians is going from 1% to 3% to 5% to 10% of the population over 10 or 20 years, now you've got a movement. You don't just have a few churches planting churches, you got a movement. Well, what creates a movement? Number one, what creates a movement is 5 or 6 church planting movements in different denominations or traditions. I know I'm going to sound facetious here. I'm a Presbyterian and I like being a Presbyterian. I enjoy my Presbyterian heritage and my Presbyterian distinctives. For reasons that escape me, not every person in New York City who wants to become a Christian wants to be a Presbyterian. I'm still doing the research on it. I haven't found out the reasons for it. I do know that Pentecostals and Anglicans and Methodists and Baptists and Presbyterians tend to reach different kinds of people. And in different sorts of, if I'm caring about increasing my tribe and not really caring about reaching the whole city for Christ, then all that matters is I plant Presbyterian churches. But it's my job, if I love the city, to make sure that church planting movements are going on not only in my own denomination, but to help them get going in the other ones. We need 4, 5, 6, 7 church planting movements going on. That means if you have 10 churches and 5 of them are planting another church every 5 years and half of them are planting a church every 5 years, you got a movement. And unless there's 5, 6, 7, or 8 of those kinds of vital church planting movements going on, you do not have even a chance for a citywide gospel movement. But then around those churches, you need several things. You need a network of prayer in which the churches are coming together to pray. You need evangelistic specialists that are reaching especially campus, college students, and youth. Number 3, you need all kinds of justice and mercy initiatives where Christians are coming together outside the churches, coming together to combat this or that needing this problem, this social issue, helping people in this needy neighborhood, and so forth. And then you also need to get all the people together in the city in their vocational fields. The artists need to get together who are Christians. The journalists need to get together who are Christians. The media people, the business people. Across, you can call these things specialist ministry networks. Prayer, evangelism, justice and mercy. Then you also need faith work initiative ministries. You also need institutions that help Christians stay in the city. In New York City, the Jews have done a wonderful job of creating institutions, community centers, schools, all sorts of things that keep families, Jewish families in the city, living in the city long term, so they can have the jobs, in publishing, in the media, in publishing, in business, and so forth. But most of all, and lastly, you have to have the leaders of these various networks and the leaders of these various churches regularly meeting together, not turf conscious, kingdom-minded instead of tribally minded, to say, what does our city need? And for a city-reaching gospel movement, there has to be that inner core of 5 or 6 church planting movements, the outer core of these ministry networks, which are rooted in the church. The churches help the ministries bring people into the churches support the ministries, and when that happens, you can start to see what I think is possible, which right now is not happening, I don't think, in any other center city in the world, whereas the gospel-believing, Bible-believing Christians are growing so much faster in the core of the center city that a greater and greater percentage of the city is becoming Christian. That will have a huge impact on the culture. It will have a huge impact on the city. And I think that is an overview, that's a quick overview, of what I think we have to do in order to reach cities today.
Hello and welcome to the How to Reach the West Again podcast of Redeemer City City. My name is Stephan Pues from Frankfurt. We're recording in Frankfurt, and this is episode number 8 called Reaching the City Together. So the topic today is collaboration. How can we work together for the kingdom in the city, for church planting, for all the issues that we're having as a vision here. And I have 2 guests with me, Jason Lim and Selly, both friends and partners here with me in Frankfurt. And yeah, welcome, both of you. Maybe you say a few words of introduction to yourself.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me, Stephan. My name is, like you said, Jason Lim or Jason Lim or Jason. I don't know, whatever you want to do with my name. I'm half South Korean, half German. I grew up in Thailand, so I feel right at home in this beautiful multicultural city in Frankfurt. I've been here 7 years now. Planted a church and still lead that church, but I'm also now the focus city leader for Greater Europe Mission here in Frankfurt.
Well, welcome, Jason. And Kelly.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't really have I don't know if there's a great
What's a French way of saying Kelly?
I have no idea. I was just in France and I don't even know. Yeah.
Who are you?
Yeah, so I came here to Germany in 2014, originally from the United States. Married. My wife is from Taiwan originally. And yeah, we've been here doing church planting since then, actually once with Stephan when we first arrived, and now at the Frankfurt Project, which is in the southern part of Frankfurt. And yeah, we love the same thing that Jason said about the about the city, that it's multicultural, that it's that there's just it's got its own character here that we really love. It's got a, Frankfurt, people from Frankfurt hate it when we call it Manhattan, but it does have like this almost like, they'll have like Little Italy, it's almost got this little, it's like a metropolitan area, but it's so much smaller than some of the places that it feels like. Yeah. So it has the feeling of a much bigger place than it actually is.
That's a good point.
And but it also has a lot of opportunities, and that's what I really appreciate about being here.
Yeah. I don't think I've ever heard you call me Jason. That was weird.
It was weird.
We got through it though.
Well, good to have both of you here. I'm also a church planter. I work for City City in Europe and also for the Center for Church Planting. Kelly is also
you forgot
in leadership of the International Mission Board.
Thanks.
So at the table here, you have several organizations represented, several church plants, several denominations, several cultural backgrounds, and that pretty much represents our city and our vision for the city. That it's a multicultural, collaborative approach to how we can see a movement of the gospel in our city. And we do believe that church planting in that is key. So at the beginning, I want to ask each of you to say maybe 2 things that you love about Frankfurt. Why is this the best city in the world?
It's a good question. One thing I think I already mentioned, I love the multiculturality. I don't even know if that's a word. Let's just roll with it. I love the fact that it's very diverse. We have 54% of the population in Frankfurt that's either is a foreign passport holder or has an immigrant background. So I love that part of the city with all its diversity. I think the other thing I like about the city is it's the only one in Germany with a proper skyline.
That's true.
It's smaller than a lot of the other cities, but it's got that, like you said, Kelly, it's got that different kind of urban vibe. And me having grown up in Southeast Asia, I think I really appreciate it. I like driving into the city and having these skyscrapers or seeing them from afar. Love that.
Yeah. So when we look out the window of the room we're sitting in here, you have high-rise buildings all around you, and it's a real urban feeling. Kelly, how about you?
Well, I'm just going to go with one right now, and that would be...
You can't use mine, though. Yeah.
Okay, I won't do that. Those were my first two. So that people love the city. Like, people who live here love the city. And I've lived in another city in the United States before, a fairly large city, actually even larger than this city. And there was a church that had a campaign that was like, I don't know, Jesus loves the city. I won't even mention it. But
no names.
But it was like, and you've probably seen that bumper sticker before. It's like, Jesus loves you.
Yeah.
I won't tell you what everybody else thinks about you, but there's like, everybody else doesn't love you. This is the point of that. And so that was the feeling that I had there. It was always like, man, this is a bummer. Like, nobody likes this city. And we almost have to like remind people that at least somebody likes it. And then here I have the feeling that people love the city. So it doesn't mean that everything's perfect here, or it doesn't mean that everyone's arrived or people don't have lots of struggles, or that there's no, the effect of sin hasn't taken its hold. But sometimes I enjoy coming from this positive aspect into ministry instead of coming from a negative one.
That's true.
Frankfurt is actually in the top 10 of the most livable cities in the world in a recent study. So the only German one in there. So we can be proud of that a little bit. And that's how it feels also to live in the city. It's great.
What would you say, Stephan?
Well, one more of my facts, and that's kind of heading towards our topic. I actually really do enjoy and love that there's actually good group of friends in the city trying to do ministry together. I think that's unique, or it's at least not that often. God somehow has given and built over the last couple of years a real good group of good leaders, of interesting people, very diverse, but also very united in the gospel and in the vision for the city. And I think what we're experiencing here, and we're going to talk about and tell about it a little bit more, is actually an amazing collaboration of people who want to plant churches, make disciples, spread the gospel to a couple of 100,000 people who have never heard the gospel. And that's honestly joyful. So that's one of the things that I love about the most of my city, that this is really working well and it's growing. So I think in other cities that's sometimes hard to build. It took a while to build it here as well, but it is actually there now and it's joyful.
That's
and
true.
It's spreading. So I love that kind of vibe of collaboration. I think Frankfurt is a collaboration city as in general.
Yeah.
So even like other businesses or nonprofits or creative things it's not a city where you fight too much against each other, but you kind of do things quickly together. There's competition sometimes, and it's not a healthy mode for the kingdom, but it is a city where a lot of things really run well together, even in the how the city is built and whatever.
I mean, that's
So
a lot of
that
its
is
history to it, just how it even was started, and
right.
and a lot of that is in there with it being for trade, and it was a place of haven for a lot of people. It wasn't necessarily, it was a place where people came to like seek
Right.
not asylum, but like
Also.
yeah. So it is I think it's kind of built into the history of it too.
That's true.
I think what I really enjoy about Frankfurt, sometimes is the urban context obviously oftentimes gets like a bad rep for like families, like, oh yeah, you want to live in the city as long as you don't have kids, and then once you have kids, like you want to. But actually Frankfurt's a great place, I think, for kids and families. Like there's so many, like kids can go swimming for free until they're 15. That's pretty crazy.
Yeah.
And then they can go to the zoo. Not sure they want to, but if they can,
I don't want to.
they
anymore.
can. They can go for free until they're 18 if they still want to.
No,
like,
they don't.
yeah, but it's like things like that where they like a couple of museums and others, they make things available. There's the Frankfurt Pass for people that have less income. So there's a lot of like great like social aspects of like people get subsidized and help from the city. So I think it's a really. I think that's really enjoyable to live in a city that feels like it's caring for you too, and it's trying to make your life. Yeah.
And we have last honorable mention is we have great food.
That's true.
It's true.
Cool. Our topic is how we can work together in the city. How can we reach a city together? So the word that's often used is collaboration. And I do want to, at the beginning, kind of focus for a few moments on, why is collaboration actually important? why should we seek collaboration? And is it just beneficial? Is it something we have to do, or is it just the hippest, coolest thing because a lot of books are written about it? Is it like the next wave of whatever we need to do? I mean, why do we in Frankfurt collaborate? What does our recent experiences here, what is the conviction behind it? So that's kind of the idea.
You were talking about books, and I was thinking, what kind of book? Like purpose-driven collaboration or something. I should write that.
Like the great collaboration.
I can see your name on that already, Kelly.
I think at least people at this table and those we're connected with, a reason for collaboration. It wasn't a cool thing when we were thinking about it at all. It was kind of. I think it was when you come into a new place, you're just you have your hand to the plow and you're in the field and you're like working, and maybe it's at one church plant that you're in, and all of your energy is just being thrown into this ministry, this church plant, trying to reach a neighborhood, and so you already are collaborating in some ways. I mean, hopefully you're collaborating with some people in the neighborhood, but also with maybe a team or other believers. So it's not like we're against collaboration, but we can be very short-sighted with our collaboration. Like, I'm already collaborating. I know 3 other believers that are working with me, And I think having the experience of having planted a church, you could call it like a holy discontentment, because like you can just be, when you're in it, you're all excited about it and like, wow, look what happened. And then through that process, you get kind of discontent because you're like, well, wow, we just planted one church and everybody I meet on the street still doesn't know Jesus or know really much about anything about him. So I think that drives you to, well, that's, even if you did that every year, planted a church like that, would be amazing. But even if you did, there would be this wide sea of people out there that still hadn't heard. So that drives us to who are other people that we can, lock arms with to do that together, because you realize that you can't, God's not going to use you to do it by yourself.
Yeah. So the challenge is too big to actually even think that on my own I could even come close to reaching it, right? Yeah. So the vision is too big to just reach it on my own. Yeah,
I think, that's the one side of it, that there's just a need to collaborate because there's more than one. It would be like, a good friend of ours, David Schulze here, he would say, it's kind of arrogant to think you can do it by yourself with one church or one organization, to think.
Even with a whole group of
if I don't collaborate, in the sense, maybe not intentionally, but I might be saying I actually don't need other people. I don't need the others, right? I can do it on my own, which is just not true. On the other side, I think sometimes there can be a danger of I collaborate because it's beneficial. We can create synergisms, but then it's less about the other people. It's more about me again. It's collaboration in a sense, how can I get other people to join what I want to do? But that's not collaboration. I think collaboration is, in a sense, also a spiritual discipline, and it humbles you in situations where you do have to maybe take your idea off the table and be like, it doesn't seem like this is what other people are thinking either, and listen to others and actually believe that the Spirit also works through other people. I know that's crazy to think.
It's a radical thought.
That the Holy Spirit also works to others, but I think that idea of humbling yourself and then trusting that God is using others to also do work, and then being open to the Lord guiding in that way. I think, it's not always easy. I think we can have a very romantic idea of collaboration, and that might be nice as long as everyone thinks what is important, what you think is important. But then you'll notice when you work with other people, that's not necessarily the case. And then what do? You can either be like, all right, you know what? It was nice while it lasted. Let's just spread out again. But then to fight to no, let's keep together. Let's either discuss this. Let's really wrestle with this and come to a joint sort of strategy and vision. I think that's been the most enjoyable part for me, because then the gospel gets lived out. It's not just proclaimed, but it's actually embodied in that willingness to stick with it and be like, I'm not gonna just run away from this, because that's not the gospel.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things, like the collaboration actually leads us towards like gospel advance, and it keeps the kind of that out there, because if we're just kind of cooperating with the church here or there, we can get really sidetracked. It's like just really, kind of a one-off thing that we do together, whether it's like a prayer event, which is really important, I'm just saying, but that could be the thing that we do, and we're like, okay, we collaborated, but it's not actually collaboration. But true collaboration, like getting over, like you talked about the strategy, having a strategy that we're working towards together, it does cause us to really say, okay, there's some things they do different in that guy's church and that guy's church, or that, that person's church than the church that I'm in. If I'm going to collaborate, where can I collaborate? If I've only got a certain amount of energy to put in this, what do I want to put my energy into? And it kind of, like, prayer is one of those things, by the way, but it cuts out some of the maybe lesser important things to collaboration that can sometimes sidetrack us from real collaboration, because it's like, well, if I have a couple topics that I can really hammer together with everybody else and agree on, it's going to be the most important ones. And so, like, the gospel and its advance is going to be always one of those most important things that it keeps bubbling to the top, because regardless, but among many backgrounds, many of us can agree on that one thing that we want to see.
So just making sure I get you, and maybe
I hope so.
Maybe that's not even the point of this. Maybe the listeners need to understand. But
the point of this podcast is for us to collaborate.
Yeah. So that's true. Well, what you're saying is collaboration sort of pushes the sort of central things into the center, and pushes the things that don't necessarily maybe need to be at the center more to the outside, because is that what? Yeah,
because the thing is, like you mentioned earlier, okay, I'm done collaborating now.
Yeah.
Why do people say stuff like that? It's because they have a pet project, they have a pet thing that's not the central thing.
Yeah.
That they really care about, and I would say sometimes place above the central thing.
Yeah.
And they're like, no, I'm going to go back and do that.
Right.
Because
so it helps.
We sing out of books.
Helps prioritize. That's actually a good point. Wow,
that's true.
It's almost like it's good to have you here.
Yeah, I think that the two things mentioned here, that why collaboration is good and helpful and important, I think they need to be seen as a combination of it. It's on the one side, it's more effective. So if I have the vision, the goal, the dream to see a movement of the gospel in the city of Frankfurt, which is basically driven by the burning desire, or the problem that we see together is that hundreds of people, millions of people live in this city who have never heard the gospel, and who don't know somebody who would know somebody who would know somebody who would know the gospel. So it's that far out. And, no one of us, that's the one side from one collaborations driven, no one, if you're really honest, will ever reach or change that significantly alone. We need to join because it's more effective. We will reach more if we do it together. So it's kind of acknowledging the truth that myself, even if I have a lot of money and maybe can plant a significant amount of churches, will not really accomplish the vision and mission I have. So I need to join with others. And that's the one side, that's the effective side. But I think what Jason mentioned as well is it's not just effective. And I think if we think collaboration only from the effectiveness, we're result driven and we're motivated by the goal of it.
Right.
Yeah. And I think that's not totally wrong, but I think we need to root that collaboration much deeper in our identity.
Right.
And that is the gospel.
Yep.
So I think a collaboration is also a gospel posture. So let's say even if collaboration were not more effective, I think we were still have to be people who collaborate because of the gospel. So
and if it
would be wrong from the gospel
absolutely
to work against each other or to just parallel or do these things. So I think the posture, and we will talk about that when we come to something like the 5 C's in a few minutes. I think the posture of the church is to collaborate. So we're building one kingdom together in the city. And that's why I like what Kelly says. So building one kingdom together is not like choosing a side issue that the church should do and collaborate on that, but on the central vision issue, we're not collaborating. I think we must collaborate on the core issues as one kingdom. So sometimes we have this behavior of building all these little gardens or these little kingdoms in the city, in every denomination, organization, or whoever does that. And we're reporting to our friends and outside people how great we are. But we should actually build one garden or one kingdom together. So there is something in the gospel that drives us, or almost like commands us to do that.
Yeah, because I think whether it's effective or not can also become very subjective. Like, how do you decide if it's, and if you only have your own agenda, and by your own agenda you're like, this is not effective, then you might, if that's the only criteria by which, then
it might short term be less effective even, because you invest in relationships that not directly produce something. Right.
Oh, 100%.
But I believe long term it's more effective.
100%.
And coming back to, you got more and more. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to ask you guys, have you ever felt that, like in our collaboration here in Frankfurt, that like there was a costly side to it? Not, I don't want to sound overly dramatic, but like,
I have to,
but there's there's meetings
agree
you go
with you on stuff, and that's sometimes.
Yeah, because we've had this, like, Kelly, you and me got together thinking about, okay, how can we do this? Everyone brings their ideas to the table, and then not all ideas are going to be implemented, even if you like believe this is the best thing I've ever come up with.
We all have to be okay to be sacrificed.
Right. And then after someone else is like, but I think this is so good, and we're like, all right, fine. Yeah.
And you have to, I mean, it also is a beautiful part because you really make friends on the way, but you have to invest in relationships, which is not painful, but it is definitely an effort, and you have to really do that. It doesn't come to you, but you have to make it. That's a key thing in collaboration. It is organic. It doesn't happen through projects or systems or structures. It happens through relationships and friendships.
And I like what you said that I said.
I like that you liked what I said.
No, I'm just kidding. But going back to the relationship thing, I didn't make that up. You put it in good words, and it reminded me of quoting Simon Sinek. There we go.
Bring some big names to the table.
I saw a video of him, and he said, "Hey, I usually, when I go to a corporation or something, I know immediately what's important to them." He's like, they list in the order that they list their values, and he said, in their team meeting or whatever, what do they talk about? And he said, good corporations, and we're not a corporation, I get it, but good cooperations or collaborations. I think there's something we can learn from that. And he said, they talk about the results a lot. They talk about like how they can be more effective a lot. And then somewhere down the line, they talk about why their people are important. And he said when he goes to great companies or great corporations, they start out with talking about how wonderful the people are, and they're really serving the people there.
Right.
And he said, of course, like those kind of things that start with relationship, those do oftentimes produce results, but it's not because of the results. It's just like a fruit of real relationship and collaboration. And so I think that's just like a principle in the world too that God gave us.
Yeah, and I think to put it in Simon Sinek words, who says always start with why. I think the why question is the identity and the vision part, and then how you do things or what you do. So the collaboration that we do in the kingdom of God should not only be about the what we want, but about why we actually are here. And I think when we think about why we're here, what is our purpose, or what is actually the identity behind the purpose, then we need to start with the gospel and not just with the outcome, the numbers of people being reached or whatever. And that is holding these two things really together. You shouldn't play them against each other. But I think collaboration, why we do it is because it is effective, but also because it's who we are. I mean, if there's one group in the world that should really be expert in collaboration, it should be the Church of Jesus, because that's him. I mean, we have a triune God who is not an individual, but who is 3-in-1, perfect collaboration. I mean, they are different in who they are and their person, but they're united, and they really perfectly collaborate in some sense. If you want to look at the perfect example of collaboration, look at the Trinity, and then how that played out into the story of Jesus and the gospel, and how they actually had different jobs in that, but they totally had the same vision, the same idea, and they collaborate. They never worked against each other, never competed or just didn't, everybody just did their own jobs in their own departments, but they did it together and collaborated to the, saving and redemption of the world. And I think that is the identity of the church where we're coming from and what we're spreading. So it is more effective, but it's also our identity and spiritual. Well, guys, let's, from this, more, why is this important, go through our story part. So Frankfurt, I think in the last 2 years, even probably longer than that, has, I think, a great story to tell about this. So there's not just theoretically, but that's where we live. We just sit right now in the meeting room of what we call the Collab. It's an office space of the Mein Project. It's a collaborative space. We even call it Collab, so it is stands for collaboration. The Mein Project. Let's talk a little bit about how that happened and why collaboration is basically the heart of that.
Yeah, I'm very bad at going, you can ask me about the future.
Well, it all started at a good burger place.
I can tell you more about the future than I can about the past. But I think it was birthed in parts in individual conversations. I know you, Stephan, and my predecessor, Rich Bonham, also had conversations about it. It was a huge thing in his heart too, that he wanted to see churches work more closely together. I know his wife actually was regularly praying for more unity in the city and for churches to work more closely together. And then there was almost different leaders at the same time God placed on their heart the need, when I think about Johannes Lavelli and some other people that it really had a heart for we need to work more closely together. And then some of those pre-existing relationships kind of got together and then we had a first conversation and then some regular meetings where we're like, okay, let's, how can we build on this relationship that already existed in some sense, and then in some sense it still had to grow, but how can we actually not just hang out and have a nice time together, but how can we work more closely together and get our ministries more intertwined into a joint vision and strategy for the city?
I remember it started at Heroes Burger Place. Not where it started, but that was a significant point. I do remember that I kind of had several conversations before that, and then invited some key people from Frankfurt who were involved in church planting to it. And I think having good meals and food together is key in collaboration, without big agendas, but just getting to know each other and dreaming and focusing on the vision. And then what happened after having a burger in the last 2 years?
Well, maybe bringing those 2 points together, I would just say that we learned through the process. So it wasn't okay, we have this amazing plan, we've got it all figured out, now we just set it on the table. Because I think in our minds that's the way it works.
That's how it always works in my mind.
And then even from that meeting, though, it was we had the people in mind who we thought were going to be those people, and most of them were but even with the people that we thought were going to be a part of that, a couple weren't for different reasons, and then even after that, it was okay, now we're going to meet monthly, we're going to work on this together. And I think you, Stephan, and I, we had more of the all right, here's our topics and here's what we're going to do on every time, and bam, we're going to, at the end, we're going to have this amazing document. That's kind of how we were thinking. And then when we got in the room with everybody else, they were I don't even know that guy, So I don't know that no one said that, but maybe somebody did say it, but that was a feeling a little bit, and we felt that way too. It was kind of all of us knew somebody, but it was it felt forced a little bit. So from the group, we kind of tried to listen, and people said, "Hey, let's can we take a little bit longer than we planned, and two, can we do some things to get to know one another better, because we see the need for that, and we want to collaborate, that desire was already there, so we couldn't. I think if somebody doesn't already want to collaborate, you can't make them. They have to come with that. But during that time, I think listening to the group really helped that, and saying we're a group, we're doing this together. It's not just Stephan you just didn't lead the whole thing, but you really intentionally said, okay, well, you have a different idea for next time, well, you lead it,
right.
And because you knew that the heart was the same. So that was kind of our next steps for over 10 months or about that we met. And really came. I think the I don't know if we're coming to these or not, but I think really two key things. One was what people in City to City and others called like theological vision. That was important for us,
which we built together.
Yeah.
It was not presented by
Right.
one of us to everybody else had to accept it, but it was actually really something after a long process we built together.
And we probably
Very key
all
point.
would have had ours that looked similar, but it would have been different. And the fact that we came together and did that together was really, really significant as well. And I think it gave us some, not freedom, but almost like comfort a little bit of, okay, I kind of know what I'm getting myself into and I know what I'm committing to. And if I'm going to be bringing people from my church or other church planners or something, then I know what the goal is, and that was really helpful. I think for all the leaders too to know, like, hey, where do we want this? Where do we feel like God is leading this to go? And then the second document that was helpful was just saying, hey, when we're talking about churches, like, what's something that we can agree on? Because that's oftentimes where the collaboration stops. Like, what's something that we can agree on that we do want to see, instead of just saying, oh, we're all different and it's going to look different. That was really helpful. I think even in maybe when you go back to a circle that maybe has a little bit more tight view of, or maybe a less collaborative nature, they didn't really want to collaborate maybe, but you show them that. It's like, okay, I can see us being a part of that. So that was key.
Mm-hmm.
I think the three things that I think of when I think what helped the process was, one, there's also a sort of like, you, Stephan, you brought it into the conversation for us to be vulnerable with one another, to share our like real struggles. I mean, there were some really personal things shared about struggles, about what people are going through. Kelly almost died.
True story.
That's true.
There's some shared experience of like, let's bring this before the Lord together in a
It would create a gospel moment.
Yeah, it wasn't just like like a working group that is like working on a project together, and then after we're done we all go home separately. Like, no, we were like sharing real things that are that we're struggling with right now. And the second thing, we got some outside help. I think that was inspiring to just get some outside coaching of people who come in for certain sessions and just guide us through some questions. Sometimes an outside voice is more helpful rather than having an inside person that sort of has to stand in this weird role of like coaching. But then, it brings us all more into the one side, because then the coach is coaching all of us, and there's none of us that's like, oh, but I'm going to lead us all through this. So I think that helps collaboration. And then the third thing, you mentioned already, meals were just so important for us to go out regularly and just
either all together or individually.
Not always together, but like maybe just two of us or three of us have meals, just hang out, have fellowship. I remember that great fish place we were at with Leonel and Offenbach.
We should go back.
We should go back there. That was awesome. That was like a very collaborative moment that really helped was formative, even though there was like no document that came out of that except for like empty plates. But it was really good.
Well, for me, or maybe for Kelly and me, or the three of us who tried to be intentional about the development of this whole process, I think it was very important to keep two things together. One was the heavy emphasis on relationships. So it's very organic, but then still have it something that is intentionally going somewhere. So I think both things can be, if you miss one of them, you probably lose it. So if you're only organic, you have great fellowship, but it's not going anywhere. And normally, especially key leaders are not interested in stuff like that. Just meet, talk, have a nice time, but it doesn't have a purpose. So they probably won't come back after the second or the third time. Or if you're only intentional, so you only have an agenda and something to go through, but you don't invest in relationships, then you will probably lose the interest of people too, because they're coming and they're not valued, they're not included, they're not, that kind of thing. I think these two things in the process of starting a collaborative network in a city are very important, and they're also important to keep it alive, to be intentional about both. What is our purpose? What are our, and what is the organic relationship?
Yeah, I remember sitting at a cafe, restaurant. I don't know what it was really. It was in a different city in Europe with one of the key leaders there, and the biggest struggle that they had with collaboration in the city was pastors just didn't have time. Like, it was so hard to get people together or even have time with people because everyone was so busy. And because if, like you said, if they don't have time to meet, or they just have time to meet like once, I don't know, every 2 months, and there's no relationships that are formed by that. Yeah. So I think what's really something we can learn from, like people like David Schulze, who's the head of the Evangelical Alliance here in Frankfurt. He told his leadership team from his
our
church.
bishop.
Yeah, he's the Frankfurt bishop. He said, you guys got to give me this amount of time every week to invest into the city movement, and for me to have time to hang out with people. And even in our collab space here, he comes once a week and intentionally sort of uses this as his office. He doesn't have to. He has his other office he could use. But then also maybe in our, you wonder why those pastors are so busy, and maybe they're not.
Yeah, he wouldn't have done, David Schulze wouldn't have done that if he didn't want to.
Exactly.
It has to do with desire.
It does have to do with priority, and then being like, oh, maybe I need to delegate some of the things in my church life to other leaders, so that this actually becomes I can't wait until I have time left over.
Exactly.
To be like, oh, I'm sitting here this afternoon. I don't know what I should do. Maybe I can hang out.
Maybe call somebody to start collaboration.
But then the likelihood that they also have time is like very unlikely.
Well,
you have to be quite intentional about your time too.
Time issues are always priorities. Always in your life. You say, I don't have time, it always means I don't have priority. And then that means, well, how can we change it into a priority for somebody and make it relevant? Yeah. Well, one thing I found along the line, and with the help of other leaders, kind of put it into words, is the idea of the 5 C's, which how we call it. I think gave us a helpful matrix to either assess and process collaborational relationships. And the 5 C's are, and they kind of describe from bottom up the stages of relationship in a city. So competition is the first one. Second is coexisting. Then communicate, cooperate, and collaborate. So that's a tool that became very helpful for us. And I think it describes basically, I mean, you could put more nuance to it, but it describes the 5 realities of the relationships in the city. And I often found that somehow the church has adopted the marketplace principle, which the marketplace understands as a positive idea of competition. So if you're a car dealer or a cell phone shop, we always believe, well, more competition is actually healthy for the market. And somehow the church, especially in the Western world, adopted that idea that competition is helpful. And honestly, church planting has been done in a competitive way a lot. So either between the church plants or between the church plants and the existing churches, the normal culture is competition. It's sheep stealing, it's taking away resources, it's I don't care if your whole Ruth group comes over to mine because I have the hip cool new worship event in town, and at the end it's good for them because they actually have the better they have the better church. That's a mode that is poisoning for collaboration, and I think even poisoning for the gospel in the city. So it's not at all what Jesus wanted to see when he talked about unity.
I think people are honest about that, but then the solution goes up the C's, but it never goes up far enough.
Yeah, you're right. And coexisting is kind of a nice way of competition. So it's just I leave you alone. So it's a little bit more peaceful. It's not really good. It actually begins to become interesting at the communication level, where you really begin to talk about it. And that's where the issue of priority and time becomes part of it. You need to take time to just have a coffee with the pastor, the church down the street or in your neighborhood. You just need to do that. So communication needs effort and time. I think that's where things begin to be interesting. And then cooperation, which is often misunderstood as collaboration. Cooperation is that you help each other. And that's good. I mean, you need, you're a church planner, you need maybe a sound system for your event. Well, I give mine to you. That's helpful. But that's not collaboration. It is cooperation. We help each other on projects, on whatever tasks you have. Collaboration really is where you begin to you join each other. So you begin to say, well, I'm committed to do this together with you, even though you're different in secondary issues of our theology. And I'm willing to invest into what God calls you to do. And I will help you to do what you do, because I collaborate with you. So you're doing things together. You're not just helping each other with your own things, but you're doing it together. I think that collaboration, these 5 can be used as assessment or even as process tools, and I think it became helpful for us here in Frankfurt to define these things.
Yeah, so what I use I think they're really helpful because they're simple, and anyone listening can just sit down with the 5 C's and just think, all right, where are we? And how do we get to the next stage? Like, they're very practical steps you can take.
Mm-hmm.
What I usually do is I paint it as like not a very urban, maybe it is, I don't know, it's not a very urban picture, but like gardens. There's a lot of garden wars in Germany, like with neighboring gardens. And so like competition
and that's
for me.
a very German thing, to have your own little garden outside the city. And
but
normally
some
you
people
hate your
even here
neighbors.
have like their, a little garden. And then there's like if you have like a townhouse, it's like a row. And then like competition is like, oh,
your fence is too way over here.
Your apple tree is growing into my garden, or like you're stealing fruit from my tree. Well, but it grew into my garden, like things like that, right? Yeah. So that's competition. And then like coexistence is a huge hedge. I don't even know. I know there's someone on the other side. I don't know who he is or what. I hear them sometimes, maybe like, oh, I think they have kids. I'm not sure. And then communication is like you start talking over the fence. What's that TV show?
Oh man, Home Improvement.
Home Improvement. Yeah, it's the guy who's like always like you only see his eyes.
It's old.
And then you're like, thanks. You're talking across the fence, and it's like, oh hey, Mr. Bill, Mr. whatever. How are the kids? And like you're having conversations. And then cooperation is like there's a little garden door.
I need your saw.
There's a little garden door, and then sometimes the kids come over and they can play, and sometimes we go there, and then collaboration for me is like there's
knock down the fences.
Yeah. When I mow the lawn, I don't even know which lawn I'm mowing. I'm not
exactly.
I don't even care. It's like it's our garden, it's our space. We're trying to create this together.
Yeah,
I think that visualizes it a little bit for people. So, yeah, encourage the listeners to just go through that and figure out where you are there.
Yeah,
that's good.
Yeah, I don't know if you're going here next, but you mentioned at some point like having the right people, and I think. In kind of in that initial group of like who are we going to start collaborating with, because you have to start somewhere. And I think what was what for us was helpful was you could just say who are the people that I'm already friends with who would help me. That's maybe easy in some ways, but then you kind of lose some influence. You could also go on the other side of that and say I'm going to find like the most handsome the most popular, the person with the most Instagram, I don't know, like likes or whatever, followers. And then, and you could also go on that side and just sort of like look for popularity, which we also didn't do, and
what?
Sorry.
I thought that's why I joined.
Well, you were our one person. We had to have one, but, yeah. So, and it's not just like to be diverse.
We needed a phase. You're just the best looking guy.
But we really needed, I think what we really were looking for, like, hey, who are people, first of all, whether they're a little bit different than us or not, who are also already leading other people. And so they're at least collaborating in their own circles somehow.
Yeah.
So not like, well, we'll hope to win them over and then they'll collaborate, but we are all collaborating kind of in smaller circles and seeing how we could bring those rings together.
Yeah, I think in the whole thing, one maybe last thing for me is that you have to have a concept of how diversity is actually benefit for what you want to do. And I do think that, even the theological diversity that God allowed to be happening over the last couple of 100 years is actually benefit. So I think it's often understood as a problem inside church because you're different. Your take on baptism or your take on spiritual gift or whatever is different than mine. It's a problem. Well,
you
it is a challenge,
you'll see your
definitely.
pet dog in heaven
but
again?
I do think that the diversity in churches is actually a big benefit for us in Frankfurt because we need to reach so many different people in the city. No one denomination or style or whatever of worship, of maybe even theology. I'm not talking about the core issues, but more secondary issues, would ever reach everyone, even if they were like the most successful, church planting movement ever seen. No one will ever reach a whole diverse city. We need the diversity in the church that God has given, and I think that's where we celebrate the diversity. We don't celebrate diversity in the key issues, and I think that is my last maybe point we do before we close. Is there's something in the core It's very simple. It's basically the gospel. It's an agreement on the core things, and not just theologically. We don't just write it down, but we make it the number one issue we talk about, and we make it the one driving principle for everything. Let's maybe at the very end, one last statement from each one of you. Why do you think, how was this gospel, which I do know you all value more than anything else in your life, how is the gospel, how did it become in this whole process the key thing for our collaboration in Frankfurt? Why is that so super helpful? Why is this superpower for every hero that wants to build collaboration? Why is gospel so key?
Well, I mean, Paul said it pretty clearly for us, like our faith rises and falls on the truth of the gospel and what we mean by that. So, I mean, it's not only a principle that we live by, but it's also that the key center of who we are. So it's our complete identity that we are in Christ. And so, I think even Paul has said that, can Christ be divided? And the answer is no. So if we're really in Christ, and that's used all throughout the Bible, these two little words, that's another way to talk about the effect of the gospel and this good message from this good news from Jesus, this reality that it has in our lives. And the reality is that there was a dividing wall, and there's no longer a dividing wall. And so I think discipleship, for instance, is just like really a process of coming into a new reality based upon the message of the gospel. And so it's not that the gospel brought in the collaboration, actually, because it said, hey, you're no longer divided. You're one. You're in me. You're my children. You're my family. You're one kingdom. You're one nation. And we're just still trying to figure out the reality of that. So it's already true. But we're just like, the little sheep trying to figure out where we are, and and so we just kind of work that out. And so I feel like this is like almost like a work of sanctification, because the reality that we are collaborators in a sense, and because of the gospel, we're just trying to figure out how that looks.
Yeah, I think going back to the very beginning of what we said about if we don't collaborate, there's a missing effectiveness, and there's a missing sort of chance for us to embody the sort of spiritual discipline of it. So I think the same applies if the gospel has to be the driving force, because if we don't collaborate, less people hear the gospel. But if we don't collaborate, also there's a second way in which the gospel is less witnessed, because what kind of witness is that to our city if the message that we're carrying to them doesn't cause us to join hands with people that are maybe different in some ways, but we still agree on that? If it's just a bad witness to the city. And then I can understand why people wouldn't want to listen to us, because the way what we're saying with our mouth and what we're living with our lives is just don't align in that sense. So I think it becomes a gospel issue in two senses. People in both ways, the witness of the gospel is in question. Are more people hearing the gospel, but is it also embodied throughout the city in a better way?
Yeah, for me it is definitely, kind of this amazing text from Dietrich Bonhoeffer, Life Together, I think is English, where he says, the community of believers, the gospel community, is not something we build, but is an existing truth, and we need to live it out. And I do think that the beauty of collaboration is really shown when you see in the process that the gospel really becomes not just something I use out there to accomplish my task, but it's actually something that comes alive and helps me in the process. So, I need the brother to speak the gospel to me, because the gospel is an external thing that needs to come into me, and it is like experienced on the way together in collaboration. I think I need collaboration to experience the gospel myself in my heart more. And also it has an effect on you guys and the city out there. But that kind of collaboration in the city is really a blessing to myself as well. Not just the effect of it, but already the process of it. Well, that is almost the end of our unit today. This was How to Reach the West Again podcast from Redeemer City City. Thank you very much, Jason, and Kelly.
Thanks a lot.
And thank you for your time. And we're from Frankfurt, and we're happy to, it was great to talk to you today about what God has done here and what some principles and experiences were. Talked about how collaboration could work, and if you're interested in figuring more about that, Google Mind Project or Frankfurt Center for Church Planting. You can also find more information at the Redeemer website. But it was a pleasure for us to be the host today, and many greetings from Frankfurt, and let's seek gospel collaboration for movements of the gospel in the cities of the world.
Amen.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Special thanks to our friends at the Center for Church Planting in Frankfurt. I encourage you to take a few minutes to assess the climate of Christian partnership in your city by using those 5 C's: competition, coexistence, conversation, cooperation, collaboration. And be sure to join us next week for the final episode of Season 2 of How to Reach the West Again. We'll be back where we started, in London, talking with Neil Powell, director of the London Project, about his past experience in a citywide church planting network and his hope for the future. How to Reach the West Again is a production of Redeemer City to City. This episode was produced, written, and hosted by Stephan Pues and Brandon O'Brien. Our associate producer is Braden Gregg. Today's interview was recorded by the Center for Church Planting in Frankfurt, Germany. Tim Keller's talk, How Do You Reach Cities, was recorded by the Lausanne Movement in 2010 and was used with permission. You can find the video at lausanne.org. Redeemer City to City is a nonprofit organization co-founded by Tim Keller and supported by the generosity of people like you. If you've enjoyed this episode and would like to hear more, subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform, leave us a review, and consider making a gift to support the work at redeemercitytocity.com/give.